That means we can move on to the elephant in the room, which is going to be the first topic in our advanced deck building section for today. And this is where things are going to get a little interesting because I'm expecting quite a few differences of opinion here about which way to go with Vetruvian when it comes to deck building for the metagame. So let's get into that, right? The state of the meta and Vetruvian's place in it. Let's actually start by asking my co-host Nangard what he thinks.
Yeah,
Nangard, what do you think about Vetruvian's place in the meta?
actually, after the recent patch, Vetruvian players or the deck building of Vetruvian players was kind of paralyzed, and as it was back then when the old third wish was nerfed, back to the last third wish, some players just didn't know what to run exactly and which lists are viable on the ladder, which is kind of sorting itself out, and more viable lists are played on ladder actually. And right now, obviously with Abyssian and Songhai dominating, it's kind of a two-edged sword to run Vetruvian, because obviously there's the weak matchup against Songhai and the rather good matchup against Abyssian, which you can't deal with when playing Vetruvian. So obviously Vetruvian has its place in the meta, as it always had, but it's not the strongest faction right now. Yeah.
Wagnozac, what do you think? What, with the current state of the meta game and seeing so much Songhai and Abyssian, one of which, as Nangard said, Vetruvian has an okay matchup against Abyssian, but it definitely struggles against Songhai. Obviously, we're going to get into the real issues with Vetruvian and deck building for the meta game. But I mean, do you think Vetruvian has a place in the meta at the moment?
Yeah, right now, for me, the only place Vetruvian has at really competitive level is what I was saying a bit before. It's mean like what I call neutral faction, which means you put only neutral minions in the deck and you try to rush your opponent down with a lot of 2-drops and a lot of good spells. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And that's the only way you can be fast enough to be on par with some guys and stuff like this, which are really oppressing on the ladder and will destroy you if you don't play like this, in my opinion. So I think that is about the only place there is. Dervish decks are fun, but not going anywhere. And don't want to speak about artifact bets because it's totally not here, in my opinion. So yeah, I think that's about the only place in the meta Vetruvian has right now.
Okay. Peepus, what do you think?
Well, first you're gonna have to look at it at two angles. If Peepus plays Vetruvian, it's the best faction. If everybody else plays the faction, it is pretty underwhelming right now. I don't agree with Wagnozac, but I'll get to this later. First, I have to. Yesterday I was watching the Code TV and I only saw one Vetruvian player in this, and he dropped out round 1. So I think this guy was pretty underwhelming too. But people lost faith in the faction. Now back to the point of which Wagnozac made. I think those rush decks with a lot of weak minions are pretty bad because neutral minions are not as good as faction minions. So what I like to play is control decks and mid-range control kinda to get your results, and I have been having pretty good results. You can also play semi dervish decks, which can be good. Asian made a pretty good list with it, which is obviously secret.
Top secret.
Yeah, it is really hard to make a good dervish list. I have seen so many people play with it as it was a pack of garbage. So you have to really be knowing what you're doing. But for me, it is more nowadays. It's more a thing to play without third wish actually, and just disregard those Dervish means, which in my opinion are pretty close to being trash if they're not going to be buffed a little bit.
So what you're saying is that you think that a really viable Vetruvian list is one that's going to play more just for value and actually totally ignore Third Wish because of the weakness of the Dervish synergy? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think with the value game we can still win. We have some pretty good cards late game or mid game. We can start to do that stuff. Until then, we just have to survive, keep their minions at bay. You have to show the chat.
Yes, for you guys who obviously can't see the chat, there's a lot of back and forth going on about Peepus's rank and people wanting to be taught by him. Shots fired, guys. Shots fired. Okay, so Ryvirath, I mean, you're a guy who likes Vetruvian, right? Even aesthetically, okay. Where do you think Vetruvian fits into the current meta? Does it fit in?
No.
What's? I mean, okay, and why? Why
Yeah,
why
no.
does it not fit in? Is it just simply a case that okay, Third Wish is gone, and now it's just the faction's just done?
No,
I mean,
it has nothing to do with that.
what is it
has
exactly?
to do. So, what it has to do with is just Songhai's dominance, right? Like, I guess I'm the crazy uncle here though, because I think the most viable build for Vetruvian right now is with your running Sabotage, which is the Blind Scorch and Rui combo with Artifact Vet OTK. Both of them together have worked really well. I don't care about your thumbs down.
No,
Really?
Sabotage is good. I don't like this artifact.
Mixed together, I found really good success with it. I think it's really strong, but you have to instantly concede the fact that you lose against Songhai. Just that's it. You don't win against Songhai with this build ever. You have at least even or good matchups against every other faction, but Songhai just is such a problem matchup for that. Like for Vetruvian, there's nothing you can do versus this faction, like, and that's why it's not relevant in the meta because Tuskboar does too much damage, Spiral Technique does too much damage, and we touched on this earlier, Vetruvian doesn't have healing, and it can't outpay Songhai either. It's not like Time Maelstrom is really going to get you that much value either because you're never going to hit that 9 mana point. You're going to get double Spiral Technique before that happens, and then you're going to lose. So
Yeah.
they don't have a good enough early game. They lose to Tuskboar, they lose to other, early drops. They don't have a good enough mid game because mid game for Songhai is friendly with Mask of Shadows and then ramping up into, Phoenix Fires and Spirals. And they never reach the late game point where they are a little bit better because they never hit 9 mana. And even if they do, they still need a board to do it with.
So, I guess that brings us to the real issue here. Where do we go from here? I mean, we could see another rework of Third Wish at some point, I suppose, but I wouldn't hold my breath for that. So, given what we have and the current state of the metagame, what are we going to do if we want to play Vetruvian in this meta? Where to? Maybe let's kick off again with Nangit. Why not?
Yeah,
Nangit, where do you think we're supposed to go with Vetruvian at the moment? What's your take?
obviously, as mentioned pretty often by now, the Dervish build, the complete Dervish build, is just not viable, and it's mainly played as a fun deck. And for Vetruvian to play this archetype, Dervishes would need some new minions with expansions, for example, or just generally buffs. So this build won't be viable till then. But generally speaking, the way to go with Vetruvian right now with the cards we have is, in my opinion, the value game. I know Songhai is a bad matchup for this deck, as said pretty often by now, but a good matchup. But this build provides probably the best matchup against every other faction, and it also provides some level of consistency in the games.
Well, I mean, Peepus was talking about this before, and he seems to echo your sentiments about sort of going the pure value route, forgetting about the dervishes. Peepus, I mean, do you think this is the way forward? For sure. I mean, and when you say a value kind of list, what are you talking about exactly here?
If the value is like dispelling their opponent's minions, because you do it more or less for free, then and you just have to take care of the body. Then.
So I mean, are you talking about list like when you say value game? Like elaborate a little bit on a deck list that's just centered on value for Vetruvian. How are you going to survive? I mean, we said the problem is Songhai, right? So okay, now when you build a deck, you're going to have to accept that you're going to have a bad matchup. Sure, that's going to happen. But if we're trying to get toward a Vetruvian list that is pretty solid, and we're going to go the value route, what are we looking at in a list like that?
Well, Russia's Curse for sure, because it trades with their weak minions, it takes away their artifacts, which they really like to play right now. Then Aymara healers, if they cannot remove it. Not everybody if they don't have a juxtaposition, and if they don't have an Onyx Bear Shield, they have a problematic time dealing with it. And other cards would be I forgot the name of this card, and the 1/3.
Cosmic Flash.
Thank you again. Cosmic Flash is really good, especially if they put you down with an Onyx Bear Shield, and then you play it on it, then you can really start to annoy them. Yeah, you just have to.
But I mean, that's still kind of. I mean, that's not going to win you the matchup alone, but it's certainly an option.
It can stall for a lot of turns sometimes,
sure,
because they have to kill it with spells. If they already wasted a lot of it, so they cannot do anything sometimes. If you place it right, then I think I would play the Blind Scourge. If you cannot deal with something, maybe you just want to give it 0 attack and maybe ignore it for now, or take it over and then annoy them with them. Yeah, I think you have to be a little bit creative, and I think the biggest issue is also your positioning. If you screw up maybe even only once on positioning against Songhai, you probably lose. If you can play this perfectly, then I think you have a shot at winning with a control deck. I think with any kind of deck, maybe not the Sabotage deck, because this doesn't, as mentioned by Riv, it is kind of bad against this deck, but I think with all other decks, if you perfectly position yourself, you can win. And that will be very hard for new players, also for better ones, because it is quick that you will do one error. So
okay.
Yeah.
I mean, okay, so Ryvirath, guys, where to from here? Let's start with Ryvirath for a change. Where are we going with Vetruvian?
Like in terms of builds, or like?
Yeah. In terms of builds in this meta, right? With what we have, and having just been hit by this another change to another strong card in Vetruvian, where do we go? Where to from
like
here
I
if you
said,
want to build a bet deck?
I've been, like I said, personally, I've been playing the Sabotage Artifact OTK stuff together. It's been working really well. It is a really greedy list. You play Mana Forges in it, so it is extremely greedy, but it works pretty well, especially because you play a whole lot of bad cards that come together to make just a really decent deck, which is really cool. And that's really all Vet can do right now, honestly. Like, they've lost so many tools consecutively that I really feel like it's one of the better decks to play, because it actually has something that all the other Vitruvian decks lack, which is proper burst out of the game, because we've been over this. Like, Vitruvian's threat range without artifacts is like 5.
Yeah.
I'd even say like lower than that, but we'll say 5.
Yeah.
So with artifacts, you extend that by a lot. Like, if I get a basic, like, let's say Aurora plus double artifact combo, that alone is pushing you up to at least 8 damage. And that's a very, reasonable amount of cards to expect, right? Like, that's 1 blast artifact, 1 tier, and 1 Aurora tier. You can definitely get more than that. You can get, that's a very, like, minimalistic expectation. That gives you a lot more burst, gives you a lot more ways to end the game. And I think that's really the way that Vet has to play right now, is more of a swingy value game in the mid game, and then ending with the artifact that to close out the game, because I don't feel like they can play a standard control game to end the game right now. I just don't think enough of their tools are strong enough when you're going against like Vorpal Reavers and Abyssian, which kind of just trash everything that Vetruvian has, or Revenants. Or on the flip side, then you're dealing with Spiral Techniques and you can't heal through it. So you get outvalued on one side and you get outdamaged on the other when you play like that.
Okay, that's interesting. So, I mean, something that has to be mentioned, if we're going to be talking about a hybrid kind of deck that you're suggesting is, artifact-heavy Vetruvian lists have always had a problem with consistency. So consistency on the draw, right? So what are you doing to remedy that problem without absolutely trashing your list by bringing in, I don't know, 3 Ether Masters, 3 Mana Forgers, 3 First Wish?
And that's pretty much my list.
Okay.
No, but just, if you're like me, you draw well, so that's fine. But otherwise, it runs
for us inferior Vetruvian players, right?
Exactly. But no, there is a certain amount of risk with the deck. You can only minimize it by so much, right? It's like I do run the First Wishes in it. I also run the Interlaces and a lot of cantrip cards because there are certain cards that you need to get to, and Mana Forger facilitates the ability to use these cards effectively. So it's not as big a risk because you want to be able to draw into your Blind Scourge and Unruly stuff. You want to be able to draw into some of your earlier game 2-drops, and you want to be able to finish the game with your other cards. Like I don't believe I run Aether Master, but in general, you run cantrips and you run a solid early game. I don't think I run less than like 12 2-drops. So dead drawing early isn't that likely, and then it can ramp up into the mid game just through solid play and getting off a good Interlaces or two, especially in that deck because you're actually taking their board state with Zenrui, then you can even advance that further through an Interlaces, right? So you can really compound your advantage with the deck, and it can really snowball really heavily through that. But it is a lot of risk early on. You are running stuff like the Mana Forge or the Interlaces, which are bad by themselves. So it's a lot of all-in on a strategy, but in the mid and late game, it actually works really well.
Okay. That's quite an interesting take on it. I mean, Wagnozac, what do you think? Now you hear 2 different approaches being suggested here: a more value control approach, and then a little bit more of like a combo approach in a way. Playing a strong early game, ramping up into a combo eventually. What do you think?
Well, I think I agree a bit with the combo list, but not entirely. I prefer right now to play even more fast than this. I think with a lot of small minions that can grow really big, like Araki Headhunter, which I think is really amazing, and you can get if you can get the game going at the start really fast, especially against Songhai, with a lot of minions, with a lot of minion growing, getting big, etc. Your opponent will not be able to deal with all of them, especially if behind this you have some siphoned energy and some answers to the opponent's stuff, and you can snowball really fast with such lists. And right now, I really like them. I tried quite a lot, and I think it does really good. Honestly, I've got tremendous success with that. Just like being like smoking your opponent and not letting them play, putting them on the reaction and not letting them develop something, which is, I think, what you have trouble to do when you play. Actually, slow minions that like Portal Guardians and stuff like this. Your opponent doesn't really even have to enter them directly. Even more Portal Guardian because it's so low HP now. Like 6 XP, you can just be dealt with 2 drops and 2 general attack in it. So yeah, I think playing the game fast is the way to go right now. When you have good spell to cycle, like Silence First Wish and stuff like this, you can draw really consistently, not getting too much trouble actually to get your cards correctly.
And you would even run? Did you say Second Wish?
No, I said
Did I hear you
First
say
Wish.
Second Wish? Okay, I was about to say. I was like, what? Okay. Run that by me again. I mean, I have seen that, but in say Macer's example of the OTK vet, he runs Second Wishes. But yeah, I don't think that's going to be the saving grace of Vetruvian. That's okay. So that's really interesting because all of you guys have a completely different take on where you think it should go.
And I'm right.
Well, we'll see about that. You can mail me your win rates, and we can analyze them because I myself have I've been a long time fan of Vetruvian since even before I actually started playing the game. When I just heard about it and I saw the faction, it's just something that really appealed to me. I liked the versatility of the faction. I liked having the good spells and the good minions and the opportunity to burst as well. Back in the day with the old Third Wish, where it still gave 3 attack to 3 different minions, and even last season, but I didn't like that second version of Third Wish very much. I think it was lazy. It was quite lazy. It just allowed people to get away with just spamming a bunch of 2-drops and recycling spells, and essentially you could just Third Wish anything. And then who draws the most third wishes and siphons wins the game. And then with this change again to Third Wish now, I've been working. I'm a control kind of player. I like combo decks as well, but I definitely always like looking for some sort of a viable control-ish list. And I've been working on one for quite a while, and I'd say my take on it is a little closer to Peepus's. I think that you can, if you build correctly, come up with some sort of a value list. I think that the speedier ones with tons of 2-drops, in particular the Arakis, and going for that kind of game, that's definitely effective. And I think that's the simplest solution in a way. I think that's the most straightforward solution is to do that. Because you've also got Maelstroms, of course. So, you irritate them, you build up those Arakis, and then, you eventually just Maelstrom and win. Or even they just can't control the amount of 2-drops you're putting out, and you manage to pull off the win. Then you have Ryvirath's suggestion, which is very interesting. I hadn't thought of going that route. I've seen lists that still go for the Maelstrom win condition, playing Mana Forgers and all of those things. But I have not seen, not on ladder at least, I haven't seen people trying the combination of the artifact combo with the Mana Forger early game, which I find quite interesting. I question what kind of win rates you're going to get with it, but I think that's generally the what I see is that people are often going for the faster list. Then there are people who have been playing Vetruvian for quite a long time who see that option but want to try something slightly different. And Ryvirath, I would be very interested to actually see your list. And maybe we could even append it to the show's stream, and people could have a look at it and see what you have been cooking up, because it sounds like a pretty interesting idea. So I guess that brings me to the next question. Outside of Siphon Energy, does Vetruvian still have staple cards? Is there a core? And I'm not talking about neutral. I'm not talking about Mystics, Primus Fists, Emerald Rejuvenators. Is there?
Oh, everything's just gone now.
Are there staples? Outside of Siphon, if we take away the neutral healings package.
First Wish is a staple for me, in my opinion. Time Maelstrom in almost every deck, at least once.
2 or 3.
At least one is a staple. The rest depends on what I'm playing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wag?
I think Rashaskas is definitely a staple for me, and of course Fontaine of Yaos. I put it in every deck. And we forgot one. Zyrix Star Strider is a staple. You cannot play Vetruvian without it.
For now.
So.
For now.
For
right?
now.
For now. That's a great point, Driver. That's a great point. Because when Mrs. Star Strider comes around, you have a choice.
Yeah, who the hell is going to choose Xerix at that point? Let's be real.
Exactly. Come on now. We've all wanted to play a Egyptian. Wait, what was the most creative term I've heard for describing Vetruvian? Egyptian space mummy robots. So you're going to have an
Yeah.
Egyptian space mummy robot female. Who wouldn't want to play that?
Wow.
I mean, come
Yeah,
on, right?
Ryvirath will have to pay attention because he will be too distracted to actually look at this sexy ass new
Okay,
Vetruvian
so-
girl, so he will actually lose a lot of games.
I just
And
need you
the
to say
second-
something. Nothing gets in the way of my win rate. Nothing.
To be serious,
Yeah,
I think
seriously.
still we should still mention that it's like crazy good looking faction, and that's why you should play it.
Wow,
Honestly,
I mean,
I'm not even
real-
trying. That's actually true.
I mean, aesthetically, I think that obviously they did a really, really good job with it. But Ryvirath, as far as you're concerned, staples. Are there staples? Is there a core at the moment?
Not including neutrals, right?
Yeah.
All right.
Other than Siphon, I guess you could include neutrals. I mean, what we're trying to find here is if someone's running a Vetruvian list or thinking about deck building, is there a core?
I mean, I definitely think there's a minimum core. Like, almost no matter what you're running, you should be running, like you mentioned, the Siphon Energies, probably 2-time Maelstrom, maybe 1. The First Wishes, the Rasha Curse is, and the Star's Fury is more than likely as well, in some form or fashion, whether you're running 1 or 2 copies.
So yeah, there's something interesting. I mean, if you're gonna run Star's Fury, so lately I've been experimenting with running 1. I used to run 2 before. Do you think it's worth running 2?
I think it's worth running 2. I like the card. I think it's important that you draw it to get that 1 power turn. I don't think that the second Star's Fury is nearly as impactful as the first, but it's just a matter of consistency. Especially if you're running the Fireblaze, if you decide that you want to run that just for the extra damage, obviously it's then even more worth it. But yeah, just as its base value, running 2 is where I'm comfortable with because 3 tends to clog at 5 mana. But yeah, at 2 you're likely to draw it when you need it, or at least be able to hold on to it.
I like 2 as well.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting thing. I mean, I've had situations where I sit and I keep getting back the second one, and it feels like I'm sacrificing my entire turn, and it's not killing the opponent, and it's barely clearing the board, and then they have initiative again on the next turn. I think it's situationally very good, and I don't think it's ridiculous to run 2. But at the moment, I'm liking 1. It obviously does affect the consistency, but I do think the card is worth running. How many of them you run, I think depends on the way you're building your list.
Well,
But
I think
but
you
that's
never
just my
play
take.
3.
You'll never play 3 for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. Even if you're running triple Fireblaze, it's not happening. It's just not happening.
Probably not, but I mean, at least with Triple Fireblaze, maybe. I don't know. Triple Fireblaze,
I mean-
like Mana Fortress and stuff, you get some wonky combos out of that.
I mean, yeah. Like I said before, you know, I find like Fireblaze and Star's Fury. Even if you have to hold the Fireblaze, or you draw into it later with the Star's Fury, it can definitely pack a punch. It's something people do not expect. And with Vorpal Reavers popping all over the board lately, it sets up situations where you can get large damage off. And Fireblaze, although it dies to Night Sorrow, it's susceptible to being killed easily by Songhai, which is already a problem matchup. Of the 2 obelisks, I think that's 3 obelisks. Technically,
There's 2
Windstorm
obelisks.
is an obelisk, but there's 2. In reality, there's 2. I
Yeah.
think that Fireblaze is a card that can have a spot in Vetruvian lists, but you have to really build very, very carefully, and playing it is difficult. It's sort of in the same category as Portal Guardian, where you can't just automatically place a Portal Guardian aggressively like you could when it had 9 HP, you know, because it just dies, and then it's a tempo loss, and you're behind, and you're gonna lose. Fireblaze is a similar thing. However, if it survives, it can generate quite some value, and it can chip away the opponent. And I found that you can start getting people within lethal range. If you've had a couple of turns of Fireblaze, even just popping off a Dervish and not getting many attacks in on the enemy general, you can still reduce health pretty fast. So I think there's an argument to be made for running Fireblaze. It's one of those cards that you can't just play it. You don't just slam it down on the board. You really got to think about what's happening. Go on, Wag.
I think you can also play Ethereal Obelisk, which is really good if you play it first turn. Like if you are
Exactly.
first and
It's
you
good
play
early.
it directly, it's good. But if you are it in late game, it will suck so hard that you wish you'd never play this card. That's the problem with the Obelisk. Now,
Yeah.
just to face it, Obelisk are good. The problem I have with Obelisk is that they are good if you are already winning, or if you are in an equal situation. If you are behind, you never want to play an Obelisk because it does nothing. And I also think that to have for an Obelisk to be worth it, I have at least 2 turns, and it's generally pretty hard to do, except in early
It is
game.
except
So,
in the early
that's
game.
my-
Yeah, I mean,
Right.
obviously, it's again, it's like Portal Guardian. If that thing dies, because it's an investment, right? It's an investment card. When you put it down, what you're saying is, I'm hoping that I get value for the next 2 turns after this. But that also means you need to survive. So,
Yeah.
you know, that's a problem. And we said before that the in-game, the in-faction earlier minion options are not so good. So if you're going to run obelisks, does that then mean you've got to pack a real hard punch in the early game as well, so that if the obelisk doesn't pay off, you're still in the game?
Yeah, I think like you need something to come back, and if you don't have good minions to come back, you can't do anything. Sometimes a good sorcery can bring you back or stuff like this, but actually it's pretty rare. Now that it costs 5, you cannot play it fast enough to recover when an obelisk early game die really fast, and it's also really susceptible to silence. So I don't know. That's what I think about obelisks, and I think if you don't get the value out of an obelisk or portal guardian early, you basically lose the game. Unfortunately, right now.
Yeah. You know, Nagert, you've been sitting in the corner there for a while. We've been getting carried away with this discussion. I mean, you started playing Vetruvian. I mean, you pretty much play all the factions, but it was about a season ago that you started playing Vetruvian, so with the previous iteration of Third Wish. So, I mean, what do you feel now? Because, I mean, you were enjoying playing the faction.
Yeah,
So if you wanted to continue playing the faction now, which direction would you go?
Yeah, as said previously with the place in the meta, I prefer, as with all of my decks, the value route, and to build a deck more in the direction of winning the game in the late game, with obviously cards like Time Maelstrom, which is the probably biggest win condition Vetruvian has right now, and the most consistent one as well. And yeah, lately I've tried out running Fireblaze Obelisk with Star's Fury, but with less blast minions on board with the situational Third Wish, opponents don't play too much against it anymore. I mean, they still do, obviously because of Rush's Curse, plus Doomcaster and Third Wish, but to pull off the Fireblaze plus Star's Fury combo, it became really hard to do that and to win games with that. Obviously in the Abyssian matchup it can be done. Also in tournaments it's an option to run it against certain matchups. Obviously the Abyssian not so much anymore because of Night Sorrow. And yeah, it became really hard, and playing Portal Guardian and Fireblaze Obelisks demands you to play defensively, kind of, and because you can't place them offensively, and which makes you really vulnerable to aggro decks like Songhai or Abyssian still sometimes.
Okay, so let's see. There were 1 or 2 questions that people asked,
Oh yeah, that's
and
still
Oh yeah.
so maybe if we can just just quickly run through these, and we're just gonna put it out to you guys and hear what you have to say. We thought the first one was kind of a troll question at first, but I think there's still some merit to answering it.
Yeah,
so,
my hair is actually the soldier, yes.
So the question was Vetazor versus Golem Vet. Which one wins in the meta and which one wins our hearts?
This is really cool
Wagnozac.
name.
Okay, so in the meta, I think Vetruvian with Mechazor wins against Vetruvian with Golems. But at S, I hate Mechazor so much that I want it gone of the game. I want that card out, okay? And so I would prefer Golem for sure.
Okay, Peepers?
Well, Mechasaur Vetruvian is actually pretty good, so it definitely will win.
Okay, Ryvirath?
Stegosaurus! Tyrannosaurus! Easy Mechazor win.
Easy Mechazor win. Thank you, Deceptive, for the question and for triggering Wagnozac with Mechazor. Much appreciated. Psycho1819 asks, how to improve obelisks to be competitive?
Well, pray to the developers and hope that they'll make it better.
Well, that's the question is, how, do you guys have suggestions for how obelisk could be made viable? What change would you suggest, Wagnozac?
Well, first, it's pretty hard to make obelisks viable and at the same time not overpowered in my opinion, because the problem is like an obelisk is a structure, so it cannot move, it cannot gain attack, and it has no attacks to begin with, so it's pretty vulnerable. So one way could be to remove this fact that it is a structure, but then you would have it moving around and summoning damage everywhere. It would be really strong.
Which could be really cool. That's going to be really cool. I mean, just imagine.
Maybe,
you know?
Yeah, maybe it's what it needs. But even though I think it's not good enough to just do that, because it would still be as slow. And so you need for it to be effective to have an impact as it comes in the game. So maybe summoning Dervish as soon as it got in the game may be useful. But it may be too strong as well for turn 1, for example.
Doing that,
Right.
it basically becomes a Saber Spine Tiger with playing Fireplace Obelisk, which costs 3 as well. So you get a...
Except you can keep generating them, right?
Yeah, you keep generating them. So you get basically a 3-mana minion out the turn you play it, and you still have to deal with it. Yeah.
Okay, so the consensus seems to be that that could be too strong, but it's an interesting suggestion nonetheless.
It's at 2 cost.
Yeah. Okay, so Peepus, you got a suggestion for what could make obelisks viable and competitive? A change.
Well, you can add a little effect. If a dervish minion that was summoned destroys another minion, you get another turn.
Well, that's quite broken. No, seriously though.
I think the dervish's summon should not be removed, because then it is actually decent. It is still slow, but stuff is good. But you can still easily move the obelisk. So I think that would be all right if you could do that. If they just stayed alive.
And then Dunecaster becomes kind of obsolete to an extent, except for the +2/+2.
Yeah, you have to change that little thing, but it is it's obsolete nowadays, anyways.
Yeah. Okay. Ryvirath?
So I would do 1 or 2 changes, and I've thought about this for quite a while because I actually really like obelisks and I'd like to see them viable. The most obvious and easiest change would be to make structures different from creatures in that they could not be dispelled in the same way or targeted in the same way. So AoE could still hit them, but like, for example, Siphon Energy couldn't because it would be dispel like an enemy minion.
Right.
And if you make structures different, then that's no longer targetable. The other way is to add a new mechanic or similar to Arclight Regalia, where it's just armor 1. So whenever this structure would take damage, reduce that damage by 1. What this does is it makes them a much stronger impact in the early game because the 2 damage minions or 3 damage minions are doing considerably less to them. So it's very much less likely to get 1 round hits early on. It still has the weakness to the spell, but then so it's kind of like a trade-off. Whichever change I think would make them viable, but they still have one distinct weakness either way.
Yeah, I think that's also a pretty interesting suggestion. I think that on top of trying to just elevate the level again, the quality of some of the in-faction minions, changing obelisks in some sort of way, and the ways you guys have suggested are really cool. It'll obviously all have to be tested so that it's not broken as hell. But I think that changing obelisks could go a long way to putting Vetruvian in a good spot, actually. I think it could be really cool. I think the play style really benefits and could benefit from a better system of obelisks to utilize. I mean, Nankert, have you thought about this before?
I mean, I wanted to basically present the same idea as Ryvirath did, with, for example, making them not so targetable by spells, as it's already an infection mechanic with Sandhowler, so they already have it in the faction, and it would just expand the variety of minions or structures in the case of obelisks with this ability, and it would also make obelisks only removable by damage removal, which
or chromatic cold,
yeah,
or
chromatic cold.
shroud, right?
AoE dispel
Okay.
with, for Bayana example, with Sunbloom as well. But it would be a considerable buff to the obelisks in general, as they're removed and silenced less often, and you could get a turn out of them, 1 or 2 turns out of them quite sometimes.
Yeah, that I quite like the idea as well. Someone talk to the devs, please. Let's take one more question, and then I think we'll wrap it up for today, guys. Inkfathom asks, what do you guys think about Zen Rui in this meta? Let's go with you, Wagnozac.
Well, I think it's pretty good actually. Even running it alone in just any deck, not necessarily only Vet, but it's even better in Vet because you have Blitzscourge. But it's really good because it allows you to really steal key minions of the worst offender right now in the meta, which is Songhai. Like you can steal the Foxes, which is pretty down awesome. For
It is
really
good. It's
stealing
really good.
really good
Rage.
swing.
It's rage inducing.
And that's but that's actually why I think it's really good right now, because we see a lot of Songhai and because it's definitely a counter to them, but it can also be good in against other factions just to steal a 2-drop. It's not useless, so I think it's pretty good.
Okay. Peepus, your take on Zen Rui in this meta?
I think Wagnozac summed it up pretty much. So I think we could just read the last question that was there.
We'll get there. We'll get there in a second.
No, you
Hold
said
on.
it's okay.
I want to. If do you have anything to add about Zen Rui in the meta?
I think Sentry is a really good card, and Vetruvian has so many ways to actually combo with it, and it can still come very unexpectedly because people just don't expect it at all.
Could you please repeat what you were
Sure.
saying about Zen Rui and its place in the meta?
Sure. So I was mostly saying that I think Zen Rui is actually better in factions that can reduce its cost inherently. I think it's better in Abyssian, and I think it's better in Magmar than it is in Vet. But I still think it's a very powerful card in Vet. The ability to blind scorch something and the just ability to play it on curve, just to take like Lantern Fox or like any 2-drop really, is just a massive swing in terms of what you get for it. Essentially, you are adding, like, whenever Zen Rui goes off, the way you should always look at it is you discount Zen Rui's mana by the mana of this card, and you pretty much can have the exact together in terms of the amount of advantage you got for a 5-cost minion. Take it to the fact that your opponent also spent mana on this, and anytime Zen Rui steals something, it's actually a massive tempo swing and a massive mana advantage in your favor. Obviously, the inherent risk is that it doesn't always go off, and it's a pretty dead card if it can't go off. 4/3 is already worthless for 5. But the risk is worth it. It's just one card.
But also take in mind that it is still weak to Dancing Blades, which are quite popular also right now. With only 3 HP, so be careful when you play them. Yeah.
That is true. And of course, Yeah, it does have its downside. It's also weak to Grasp of Agony plays. If you're stealing a 2-drop, the Zenru is obviously in the perfect position to get grasped and die if they hit the 2-drop, grasp 2-drop, and it gets hit. But I tend to agree. I think Zenru is a pretty awesome card. I like the tempo swing that you can pull off with it and develop simultaneously. The body isn't great, but it's good enough if played at the right time, and even sometimes just on a Primus Fist or a Healing Mystic, it still gets value. It forces your opponent to deal with it. And as Ryvirath said, the opponent had to pay mana to get the thing out on the board in the first place. So you're stealing the mana investment, and you're developing a 4/3. I think it's good. I think it has a place in the meta. I think in Vetruvian for sure, but surprisingly, I also agree that it's actually pretty good in something like Magmar or even Lionar, one might argue. There's a place for it in the meta, I think. Nangert, would you like to close us off here with your thoughts on Zenrui?
Yeah, sure. As all of you, I think Zenru is a great card and has its place in many different decks as it's a huge value swing. Because just stealing 2-drop is basically taking away taking into consideration a 2/3 minion that you take 5 stats from your opponent and add them to your board, which is a huge board swing, and it has to be dealt with by your opponent. So especially in control decks, it's a really good card because it's just basically removal and summoning a minion at the same time.
Yeah. Okay, guys. I guess what we're going to do is we're going to wrap it up for this week. We'd both like to thank all of you for being on the show, taking out your time and coming to chat a little bit about Vetruvian, a faction that's not in the best spot at the moment, but it's certainly worth spending some time with and exploring, especially now since there's no clear-cut identity, no clear-cut builds for the faction. I think the consensus is that a couple of changes have to occur, but it's still something that I think people should explore with, and it can still be rewarding. It's just you're not going to win as easily against Songhai. And turn 2 Vorpal Reaver is difficult to deal with in any faction. So find a way. Okay. Thanks everybody. Next week we are thinking about going Vanar. And we will be sure to put up who the guests are going to be for next week's episode. Thank you, Wagnozac. Thank you, Peepus. And thank you, Ryvirath. All the different time zones.
Take care.
We'll catch everyone again next week.
See ya, guys.
See ya.